does not want us to see God. He's going to go straight after the love between a man and a woman. But if we get back to God's original plan, and I want to look at some of the verses in here, and the imagery is a bit archaic, and so you couldn't really use some of these lines, you know, with a girlfriend. You know, if you want to, your hair is like a flock of goats. It's not going to go over real well. Your cheeks are like half pomegranate. Are you saying I'm fat? No. So some of the imagery is not going to go over real well, but look at the love that's present between the lover and the beloved. And St. Thomas Aquinas, I understand that when he was on his deathbed, told the other monks to come to him and read him the Song of Songs. That as he was dying, this is what he wanted read to him. Because he knew that heaven is the wedding feast, where our wedding with God begins, our marriage to God, that full union of two lovers reaches, you know, its consummation. And so you look at the imagery of what St. Thomas Aquinas listened to as he was passing into the next world. Some of the words here. You are all fair, my love. There's no flaw in you. Come with me. It says, you have ravished my heart, my sister, my bride. You've ravished my heart with a glance of your eyes. How sweet is your love, my sister, my bride. How much better is your love than wine. You are a garden locked, my sister, my bride. A garden locked, a fountain sealed. Elsewhere it says, let us catch the little foxes that spoil the vineyards, for our vineyards are in blossom. Now, I want to break down some of this imagery that he's talking about here. First off, he says, you've ravished my heart, my sister, my bride. Notice the order of the words. He refers to his beloved, not first as his lover, but as his sister. And I truly believe that if a man cannot look upon a woman first as his sister, he will be utterly incapable of loving her as his bride. And so our world does not give us this idea of entering into romantic love with first this brother-sister affection towards each other. I was speaking at a Catholic university down in Washington, D.C. There are about 400 college students at the talk. And I asked the students, when was the last movie you saw that portrayed masculine friendship? That a man can be a friend to a woman without implying anything sexual, that he want anything sexual from her. When was the last movie you saw that portrayed masculine friendship? Raise your hands. What's the last movie? They couldn't think of one. Silence. There's one student raised his hand. He said, oh, I know, Finding Nemo. I said, but that doesn't count. They're fish, you know, cartoons. How fascinating that, you know, and there are movies out there like Bella. You saw that a few years ago. That showed mass. How to enter into romantic love. To begin it with the season of first my sister before we move to the bride part. So often the relationships start out so physical, you jump to the intimacy of bride and groom, and then you hope a friendship will blossom afterwards, and that marriage maybe is going to pan out in the future, and then you have this epidemic of friends with benefits and hooking up, and then it never leads to the love for which we yearn. And so to begin with, my sister, my bride, you look at the language here. Let's catch the little foxes that spoil the vineyard. For the vineyard is in blossom. The vineyard is their love. And they say, let's catch the little foxes that can spoil it. The little things that come into love to destroy it. And I would say that for a Christian couple, people like yourselves that want to put God at the center of their relationships, look at the little foxes that try to get into the relationship. I think so often the greatest little fox is lust, where he slowly tries to work his way in between them so as to separate them. And I think for a man and a woman, these little foxes appear in different forms. And I think for the guys, the most difficult form of temptation as a single man, I think for a lot of guys, is pornography. And I'm not going to get into an extensive explanation of the problem with porn, other than to point out that a lot of men don't realize that when they look at porn, some of these women, some of them aren't even human beings, because companies like Maxim magazine computer generate fake women for some of their magazine pictures. But some of the girls in these magazines who are human beings aren't even alive anymore. Porn stars have an enormous mortality rate. Death, suicide, drug overdose, AIDS, what have you. In fact, I got an email from a grandpa whose friend's granddaughter was in the porn industry. And she died of a cocaine overdose. After the funeral, the grandpa emailed me. And he said, do you ever think how sad it is, how many men are still lusting after pictures of this girl on the internet without even knowing if she's dead or alive? the morbidity of the thought of lusting after a girl who right now could be in a coffin should make every man who looks at porn step back and think, like, what am I doing with my sexuality? Who have I become to women, and who have the women become to me? A Playboy model, just this, I believe it was in January, was murdered by her ex-boyfriend. They found her body in a dumpster. She had been burnt. Her entire body had been burnt. They couldn't even identify her except with her dental records, and they found out that she was this Playboy supermodel. And this, ultimately, is where the devil wants us. I heard a priest once say, the devil just doesn't want to get you to sin. The devil wants your children dead in a dumpster. The malice of Satan is without any bounds, without any measure. And what he ultimately wants is death. And this is, I think, the ultimate fruit of lust, is death. It begins with a mere temptation, but when it reaches full maturity, it brings forth death. And not just a physical death. I live in San Diego. We just had a terrible tragedy last month. A girl named Chelsea King was abducted while on a jog around a lake, a teenage high school girl, and the man abducted her, abused her, and then killed her, murdered her, buried her in a grave, and they identified what they believed to be her body a few days later and were able to identify with her dental records. And you think, this is the culmination of lust when it reaches its ultimate point, death. Not just physical death. You look behind every abortion is an act of unchastity. It begins with the lust, and then it ends in death. But not just the physical death, the emotional death, the depression that comes so often afterwards. The American Journal of Preventive Medicine has now told doctors that if they have a teenage girl who's having sex and one of their patients, they said screen her for depression and provide her with anticipatory guidance about the mental health risks of these behaviors. Because the lust leads to an emotional death. There's dying within her own heart. I remember speaking to a high school boy. He'd said he'd slept with almost every girl on campus. And I invited him to look at the way the girls were living before they met him, and then the quality of the girls' life after the relationships he had with them. And he thought about the girls, and he said, yeah, I guess I pretty much destroyed them all. And I remember him using the word destroy, that he looked behind him and saw basically a trail of damaged and discarded girls. And so this lust leads to the emotional death, the spiritual death through sin, the physical death through abortion or whatever. This is Satan's ultimate plan. And even the death of a potentially holy and good relationship. I received an email not long ago from a young couple who were chastity speakers. And they would go into high schools and talk about chastity. But in private, they were struggling with the chastity themselves. But they started to make these justifications. Well, we're going to get married one day, and we do really love each other, so it's not a big deal. And eventually, these little foxes got into their vineyard, overtook any love that they had, and the relationship was destroyed. And now they can't even look at each other anymore. It created such isolation. And so the devil ultimately wants to come in with just, hey, it's not a big deal. You know, you guys really care about each other. It's not a problem. But when it's all said and done, all he wants is destruction. The opposite of lust is purity. Purity brings forth the opposite fruit, which is life. Spiritual life, holiness. The emotional life of joy that comes with living according to God's plan. Also, the life of new life, the children that come forth from a chaste union within marriage. The purity is life-giving. And at the core of the difficulty for so many men with this lust is this lie of pornography. And the solution isn't just throw away your porn, then you're a good boy. So often I think as chastity, speakers or promoters, we leave it at that. Well, get rid of your porn, then you're good. Now let's move on to the next subject. It's just simply not enough, because the solution is just follow the rules, then you're doing what you ought to do. The solution is an actual transformation of our hearts, where we ask God to teach us how to look at women perhaps for the first time with his eyes instead of our own eyes. Number of prostitutes who became holy wives and holy mothers, and one morning he was coming out of a brothel, house of prostitution. A man saw him, recognized him as a Christian, was so infuriated with his hypocrisy, hit him over the head with something and killed him. And the prostitute later said, well, you don't know what that man had done for me, but it was too late, and he was martyred. Now, I would not recommend you try this as a method of evangelization. I mean, let's do a car wash for pure heart. Let's get a prostitute for the group. Take me out of context, so I get in trouble. But the point is, though, that this man could be in the presence of what other men would consider an unbearable temptation. But he was able to see her as his sister in humanity before anything else. And as a result, he was capable of authentically loving this woman. You read in the Old Testament, the book of Tobit, It's a beautiful love story in the Old Testament. If you haven't read it, read it over and over. And in it, this young man, Tobiah, marries this woman, Sarah, and on their wedding night,